beautiful day in New York City. Very, very lonely streets here, but we're getting by as best we can. I hope you're all safe and healthy out there, wherever you're dialing in from. I'm Kate Westfall. I'm the COO of Global Ag Investing. We're very thrilled about this week's edition of our webinar series, and thank you all for joining us each week. And if this is your first time with us, we hope you'll keep coming back. So today's conversation is going to be a great one. I hope you'll have lots of questions for these three esteemed gentlemen joining us today. We'll kick off with Trevor Meacham from Valley, and he's going to lead off our discussion. So Trevor, I will let you take it away, and then I'll come back at the end and help out with some Q&A. How's that?
Appreciate it. Thank you very much. Great to be here. Again, thank you, Kate, for this opportunity. And thank you to our panelists. And I'll introduce them here shortly as well. But, you know, one of the things that just, again, thanks for joining us and having us a part of the webinar and part of the Global Ag Investing webinar series. So as Kate said, my name is Trevor Meacham. I'm the Vice President of Global Technology Strategy and Industry Relations for Valley Irrigation. That's a mouthful. We got to work on that one. But today's expert panelists really bring a lot of value and diverse and very passionate experiences, I would say, to this discussion. And I'll get to them and introduce them in just a minute, as I've mentioned. But really, for us and for Valley, the purpose of GAI is really to provide growers and ag investors with actionable and strategic market intelligence. So, and I think that's something that we can all use a little bit more of in these times. And I think, of course, when you're in farming or you work in farming, they all tend to be uncertain times. But as the title of this webinar says, if you eat, you're in farming. And it's just that. Growing up as a farmer myself and having experienced agriculture really all over the world and different roles as a part of my career, this has kind of made me think more about not only just our farmers, but also the production and the processes of getting food to us, as well as the land that it actually takes to feed the growing population. So when we consider today's environment, I too go to the grocery store, as well as I'm sure everybody else here does. You just expect to kind of see sometimes, what you need on the shelf. And I think that's the state of really where we are as it exists today, which is, you question, how are we going to eat? How are we going to really move, progress? So today, if you eat, you're in farming, and we really welcome all of you. So, Kate, if you'll go to the first slide, please. So, actually, sorry. Hey, thank you. There you go. So, as we all know, and I'm sure many of you have seen this before, the population will continue to increase. So, the growing demand for food and the demand for freshwater resources, this is where irrigation, at least from our perspective, really helps increase both yields and utilizing a lot less water. So we'll talk a little bit about what that equation looks like, and we'll get to that here shortly. But if you go to slide 2, Kate, to date, on average, the U.S. farm feeds about 166 people annually, and that's U.S. and abroad. So when you start putting those numbers really into perspective, in order for farmers to kind of keep up with the projected growth of the population, more food will have to be produced really in the next 50 years as opposed to the past 10,000 years combined. So additionally, this means that, one of our panelists here probably grows twice as much food as his parents did, utilizing less water and energy and those fewer emissions as well. So Kate, so slide 3, please. Thank you. Now, you see here in 2018, 22 million full and part-time jobs are really related to agriculture and to the food sectors. So, in fact, 1 in 12 American jobs is really dependent upon the agriculture in some way. So when we look at the ag industry's contribution to the job market and the economy, it's pretty major. But I think one of the things is just the unawareness, or maybe a lot of us are not aware of the influence of that as a part of it. So when you look at, I'm sorry, if you go to slide 4, the nation as a whole, we lost more than 100,000 farms between 2011 and 2018. And with 12,000 of those farms were roughly just in 1 year. So when we look at the way we see food on the shelves and trace back to where it comes from, I think kind of what drives this home for me is really around not just the economic losses, but more importantly, kind of the legacies that have built that in hard road to recovery. So to me and many of you, I'm sure, this is where, these stats become more than just a volatile number on a spreadsheet. And at Valley, as a part of our contribution, we have a valuable perspective within ag. And this isn't just, where we're a part of the irrigation or center pivot industry. We really did, create this. And over 60 years of experience and more than 25 million acres around world irrigated by Valley built equipment, we tend to know a few things about ag anyway. So growers are asked to do more with less every day. And, our job is to know what those challenges are and what the growers really face. And this is where we want to be able to listen and identify with those other opportunities that are really there for us. And it is a part of our culture. We have to look at innovation. And in innovation, it's a little bit of different aspect as it exists today. And this is what really kind of enables us to adapt to different opportunities, and including, different things of connected crop management and the evolution of autonomy or autonomous crop management. So while the return on investments of pivots really is pretty clear today, it's proven around to increase in irrigation and just increase yields by 2 or 3%, or excuse me, 2 or 3 times over that of non-irrigated land. But and as one piece of equipment, that's something that stays in the field 24/7 and an average of 20 years. The center pivot is kind of a unique position to serve as a data hub for growers and additional things to create more of a seamless integration of opportunity of where we can connect things in the most remote locations, which is where we really farm. Water is the number one determinant of crop yield, and access to accurate and real-time data. This is, to me, what helps growers make more informed decisions to conserve resources and really produce greater yields. Now, to kind of give a little bit of a picture, a view of how we see things, this is something that we put together that's called Valley Smart Farm. And what this does is it really kind of shows you, starting with the pivot as a foundation, we continue to innovate with new technology. So as an example, valley scheduling or irrigation scheduling for a grower. This is where we try to help identify certain areas of the field that need moisture, so that the growers or irrigation manager or farm manager can go in there and make adjustments when the plants need it and know exactly how much that is. A lot of that times there are variable and variations of that go on, and with that, that's understanding how we do that is to assure that we can create variable rate irrigation and apply it where it's actually needed. So we're not overwatering or doing too much to the plant, but giving it exactly the right amount at the right time. Additionally, when we've talked a lot about new technology, this has been around different things in terms of imagery and sensor technology is a part of it. So Valley Insights is something that we've been working on. It gives a proactive text alert to the growers, which then an anomaly can be detected so that they can see or take action on that issue sometimes before crop damage can occur. And then, overwatering or underwatering is less relevant from a plug nozzle as an example on a pivot. But to me, this is where, these types of innovations are at the bleeding edge of the industry. And as you know, the constant evolution, I think we've all seen this. It never stops improving. So, Valley, we're trying to develop the next iteration, getting more advanced with better resolution and imagery and doing things with on-pivot sensor technology that kind of help pave the way towards autonomous pivots or equipment that gathers data and notifies the farmer that can then implement a variety of actions from anywhere via the smartphone. So, as I stated earlier, we continue to listen to the growers and to our own dealers who are always out on the front lines and in the fields every day with our growers. We evaluate kind of an ag ecosystem as an ongoing basis to make sure that when we're providing our solutions, we're also making a difference in the grower's bottom line. And this next slide kind of gives a visual demonstration of what I mean by the ag ecosystem. And really what I think about this and farming myself and looking at the different types of data that are actually out there, I also think of, when you come into a situation, we've all heard about ag tech and startups and everything that we're also involved with. I think of farming as a startup in itself. And what I mean by that, every year you begin, a process or life cycle of that season. And while the intent maybe isn't really to establish a surmountable revenue to achieve some unicorn status of a major buyout, or it could be, perhaps, but you do look at it in, being able to continue optimal growth around production and yield for the best contracts to be in business in another year. But, primarily where Valley's core focus has been irrigation and continues to be, new technology is what's kind of helped us increase additional opportunities for us to be involved with other segments in ag as a part of that system. So, and given today's environment, we know the ag ecosystem has really kind of taken a hit these last few months. And as COVID-19 pandemic has really affected nearly every aspect of society, this is including the global food chain. And we've talked quite a bit about that. And we've seen one of our panelists talk quite a bit about that, syndicated through the US. These guys who are joining us today are living that and have had to find kind of new ways to distribute product as well as stay viable around this new normal. And some of the ways, that they're altering practices and everything from land use to labor, as well as, seeing where the right investments and the right areas of growth are actually are today. So that'll be part of our discussion today. So at this time, I'd like to welcome Shay Myers. Shay is the CEO of Hawaii Produce and Bare Naked Onions. Shay, thank you for coming on board with us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Excellent. And Edward Hargroves, he is the co-founder and partner of Goldcrest Farm and Trust. So Edward, thank you also for
Thanks very much as well.
Appreciate it.
Great to be here, Trevor.
Very much. So guys, let's I'd like to, if we can, just kind of jump into some of the panel questions. And, the first one that I'd like to kind of think about and ask is and just kind of frame up, the global population is growing. And as we noted previously, in 2050, the population will be almost around 10 billion. Growers are always asked to produce more with less. This is less. And that's kind of this is the challenge now, and will only be getting a bit more difficult in the future as well. So Shay, if I can kick it off with you and just kind of ask, what are the steps that you are taking to kind of maximize your yields while using less water and energy and labor? And how does that kind of how does this have an effect on you?
Sure. So mostly what we do are likely incremental improvements, right? There's not anything major that we do, with the exception of a center pivot or drip irrigation. So those are two major things that we do. Our onion production is 90 to 95% drip irrigated in today's world. In our valley where we're at, we're fewer center pivots just based on, some of the restrictions and older farms and stuff like that. But that's another way to do it. That's going to save 30% on our water. And not only is it better water when we talk about inputs, then we can precisely either overhead or drip irrigation. We can get in the field and put the inputs in directly to the plant, right? We don't have to try and run a ground rig through the field and side dress or do a foliar application. So there's some pretty significant improvements from an irrigation standpoint, and that progresses and changes and is adopted on a higher level every single year. So that's one thing. Low till where we can. Some of the vegetable crops that we're doing are not really very, it's hard to do low till, but we do that where we can with the crops that make sense. Certainly monitoring is probably the next significant thing that we do to try and improve what we're doing, whether it's, the water retention in the soil, so we know when to irrigate, like your aqua track that you're talking about, weather stations, so we know on a specific basis what each field has, how much water we really need. And then, just monitoring as best we can all of the different applications and inputs that we have. So, it can go into foliar or petiole samples from the fields to know what we actually need to do. So it used to be that it's kind of a gut check. You did certain inputs based on experience and past family history and family or farming history as well. we need so many units of NP&K, and that's what you would do to some extent. And now we can really get a snapshot, a moment in time that gives us a lot more accuracy in what to do there. And that's another way that we are, significantly improving and reducing the number of inputs that we need and improving our yields at the same time.
Wow. Excellent. Yeah. So clearly there's a lot of effort and goes behind that. And I think that's one of the biggest things as well, is when we look at this, from the water and energy uses, especially from labor as it exists today, the optimization of a lot of what we're trying to do and taking some of those different opportunities in technology and even looking at the past history, I think is always something that I've always looked at. And, it's kind of that new shovel test, if you will, right? As I would describe it, simply just, I remember still going out with my dad, and I'm sure you still go out there with your kids as well, is one of the things that you still have to look at. Is you can enable so much of this, but where are some of the areas that you're kind of, having to really, really look at to kind of combine both to make the best soup, if you will.
Exactly.
So excellent. Edward, when you're looking at a lot of this, how do you determine kind of which land or regions are kind of those target for investments as a part of your role in doing more on the ag and land investment side?
Sure, yeah. So obviously we're not the grower. Look, I think the approach to sort of farmland investment is there is no sort of silver bullet, necessarily one approach that's sort of better than any other, any holy grail, as it were. From our perspective, I think an investor needs to play to their core competencies of, where their strengths are. And from our side, it's really that, we are very much of a quantitative, research-driven shop. We have a team which, on the finance side, has deep experience in macro and ag, commodities, currencies trading, capital markets, real estate investing, entrepreneurship, building companies, etc. Right the way through down and then onto our farm team, sort of experience on the ground, understanding farms, irrigation infrastructure, etc. So, but it all really, as far as how we invest, it really all starts from the research level. And back in the day when we first started our initial fund, which is called AgCoa, even pre-Goldcrest, it really started with the basis of developing in-house proprietary sort of quantitative and qualitative metrics to essentially infer where we were going to focus in the US. We had no allegiance to any one state. Obviously, you're talking to someone who probably doesn't necessarily sound like he's coming from the heart of the Midwest. And so, we started doing a lot of analyses across states where absolute relative value was, what the performance of certain states and regions was over history in bull markets, bear markets, what types of crops they grow, what our views were on a short-term and long-term sort of basis for crop prices going forward, and so on and so forth. And really aggregate a lot of these quantitative and qualitative criteria, and then with that, just inferred, okay, these are certain regions that we like that tick the boxes for a lot of these areas. And from here, okay, now let's go build a management team on the ground in those states. So find talent that really understands local markets, who have a network, who understand where the good farms are, the bad farms, the good farmers, the bad farmers, etc. And from there, it's about seeing lots of deals, really putting everything through a funnel. Maintaining your criteria of saying that we are, truly focused on sort of real estate metrics and whatever metrics that we have in-house, not falling in love with any one deal that, you might have a great farm, but it might not be a great investment. So, oftentimes we find that superstar farms are trading at low cap rates that really don't work for the return profile and what we're trying to do. So maybe it's about finding those farms that are still good enough, still quality deals, but they have some hair on them. You can do more asset management. You can bring in this technology to maybe to add some irrigation infrastructure, etc. But really, we start from the very top. We took a map of the US. We had this sort of sausage making process, and we said, okay, from here, it drilled down to these are regions that we like, and now we focus on those areas. And I think it's really about, from our perspective, making sure that out of the gates, you were in the right region where there was value, where there was water, rather than trying to find the best farm in the wrong region. So, if you were concerned about climate change or something, and you didn't want to be in a dryland state, or if you found the best land in the state, but the state was overvalued because it just gone up in a bull market. So answer those questions first, make sure you're in the right region first, and then build a team from there.
I see. Oh, interesting. And I have kind of always had a question around that myself, and not being as much affiliated with that side, but is it always kind of a turnkey solution that you're generally looking to build as a part of that as already to then go into it more from an operational perspective, or is that something that you're finding more on kind of partially development and then moving forward, or just starting exactly from the foundational piece of scratch?
Honestly, I'd say there's a sort of the glib answer is, wherever it's a case-by-case basis. Wherever, obviously, we're in a difficult economy where, really, really massive returns are harder than maybe perhaps they were in the past during periods when ag prices, everything was going up every year. So, we find deals where maybe buying the farm by itself was good enough. Sometimes it's about, you found an asset that, you purchased it off based on the farm basis, but it was the capex and the asset management that you did that got it over the finish line, that made the deal accretive or not. Things like that. Maybe it's a combination of the two. So there really isn't sort of any be all end all for what farm works. It's case by case basis.
Sure. Okay. Excellent. Well, kind of moving into the next piece here, growers are still, as we've seen anyway, connected to land, and they still walk the fields, right? They still feel the soil. They put years of experience to work, and that may never completely go away. But one of the things I want to ask, and Shay, this is for you specifically, what kind of speaking on technology and putting that kind of efficiency into play, what is the efficiency and decision making around that in terms of what role does that technology play for your decision making?
Yeah, there's a lot of places where the technology is helpful. It's a tool, and we will use all of those tools to the best of our ability. But there's still lots of challenges in capturing the data and getting granular enough with it to understand what the data means. So there's a lot of people that want to collect our data today, right? They're like, well, every tractor that's running through your field is collecting data. Every spray coop, the overhead pivots, there's tons of data coming in, but still today, all of the variables that Mother Nature throws at us makes that data useful, but not the end all and be all, because it can't be. There's just constantly all of these variables that Mother Nature throws at us. And that's what surprises people. We've had a lot of people with different technology come to us, and they're really excited. They have the funding and the background and the skill set to bring AI, as an example, on an asparagus picking machine, which you can see in one of my videos out there that's in the field. But when it's one thing to run this machine in a lab, and it's another thing to even run it on a small scale, maybe in a greenhouse, and it's a whole different thing once you're in the field. The row spacing, the plant spacing, the plant growth, the temperature, the growing degree days, all of that stuff has an impact that adds so many more variables that, yes, you still have to you're going to take all of these tools, they're going to go in your toolbox, you're going to utilize them, but you still have to be boots on the ground, and you still have to do, I think a lot of people that aren't associated and actively working in agriculture would be surprised by how many decisions are made based on, historical practices and gut feel, right? Not because you have the exact science behind it. And previously we've spoken about how in the greenhouse setting, they've been able to use AI and outperform, in some circumstances, farmers in those settings, because they can monitor everything, control everything from light to humidity to, all of those variables that we can't outdoors. So we're still going to, and for many years, we will have a significant reliance on the farmers and agronomists that are in their fields every day.
Yeah, and you brought out that point. We have kind of all discussed that a little bit in previous, is you know, those, and you bring up the point about the decision-making process, right? We used to call it 40 decisions in 4 minutes. It's like every day, this is exactly as a grower, when you get up, you have to start thinking about all of these things as a part of that process. And technology is only an enabler as a part of the process, really, at the end of the day, rather than a complete solution provider, right? And this is why I think technology, you know, if it iterates and continues, if there was only one solution, I think we'd have one version of iOS at the end. You know, there wouldn't be an iPhone 11; it'd be just one. And so when we look at that adopting technology, no different as part of our manufacturing process, and that's always been an interesting piece, I think, for me to really kind of understand and see. The other thing I wanted to understand is what kind of the new processes, innovations that you today kind of feel that are really maximizing some of those returns for you.
It's a good question. Probably some of the most valuable tools that we have are the simple things like the petioles, so we know what's going on with the crop in real time. Water monitoring also is, you know, in that same realm. Yield monitoring, the same thing. I mean, we're still dealing with all the variables that Mother Nature puts into play, but we can still learn something every year, and that's the thing that is very complicated, or more complicated than a lot of people understand, is you think you'll learn a lesson one time, you figure something out. Growing white onions is a phenomenal example. They're very difficult to grow in our region. They tend to have mold and you know, green shoulders and all of these other things. And we make these incremental, tiny incremental improvements every single year. And maybe for the last 3 years, in our case, we had it figured out. But I would not be surprised if in 2020, if on, you know, the several hundred acres of white onions we have, if we had a total failure. I wouldn't be surprised, because there is always something outside of your scope of information and knowledge and experience that can totally throw a wrench in everything that you're doing. Wow. I'm sure it makes Edward's job really hard trying to figure out which farmers to work with too.
Yeah. I like what I'm hearing there.
Well, speaking of that, that's a great segue. Edward, from your perspective as an investor, right? You employ ag tech, and it's some of this in the areas that you do to entice, you know, tenants and to rent available land. So how does that kind of existing technology infrastructure or best practices, I'd say, how does that affect the underlying asset or the value of that land?
You know, obviously on the operator level, and particularly some of the slides that you showed before, you know, a lot of these types of technology, you know, even on the ground and in the air and data and weather monitoring, et cetera, you know, they're all more related to the grower than they are to the landlord. You know, talking about technology from my seat, from the landlord perspective, is probably really just talking about irrigation infrastructure, you know, how you can disseminate water, how you can control it, maybe, you know, control it remotely, et cetera. And maybe sort of technology through the on-farm storage side as well. So, you know, but outside of that, I think, you know, look, all else equal, of course, improved, newer technology improves the asset value. All else equal, if it can improve the farmer tenant's bottom line, one would expect that their ability to pay higher rents should also translate to sort of higher real estate values. Now, in practice, you know, it's not always, you know, like that. You know, we go out and we purchase land. First and foremost, it's about the quality of the dirt that we're buying and whether that sort of underwrites or is close to underwriting. And really, you mentioned technology from this perspective is sort of secondary, that maybe if we're buying pivot infrastructure that's already on the property, you know, that we're getting a price that sort of works, or if we're getting storage such that it's not, you know, it's still in decent enough condition that, you know, you can get a yield off that sort of gets you over the finish line. But really it's about focusing on the dirt first. And, you know, I don't think that technology really is anything that are sort of, outside of that, we don't, you know, we don't play in that sandpit very much.
Sure. No, appreciate it. Now I'd like to talk and shift a little bit about specifically about the ag today in COVID-19. I mean, many people understand the obstacles and may not understand the obstacles it causes, but how it disrupts the ag ecosystem and How really has, and Shay, I'll start with you first again. How has this pandemic kind of affected your operation?
Yeah, so the ramifications of COVID are, I think, much more acute in agriculture than in many other sectors of the economy. We're seeing the reduction, and again, I'm going to stay specific to onions here because it's easier just to speak about one single commodity. But with onions, we saw in the middle, in the worst part of the shutdown, we saw reductions of 95% of our business going to food service. Food service really has two different parts to it. It has the fresh side that goes to restaurants, to schools, to nursing homes, hospitals, all of those things. And we saw, like I said, a 95% reduction there. The other part of food service is process. So they will take our fresh onions and turn them into onion rings or frozen IQF onions, instant quick freeze that's used in recipes or fajita mixes or, in the back of the kitchen, in these other settings. And that also, now, while it wasn't a 95% reduction, we've seen a 60% reduction there. And that reduction has become something that we will continue to see the ramifications of. Even with the startup, that production stopped. Those freezers filled up. The consumption wasn't there. So we were seeing contracts on with processors cut by between 30 and 45%. So I think what I'm saying is so acute about agriculture and so significant, and why we're the canary in the coal mine in some ways, and especially with storage crops like onions and potatoes. This is a problem we'd already planted when everything began. So all of the acres, as per normal, for the most part, were planted. A few acres have come out in Washington of potatoes that I've seen, but in general, everything is still there. And we're going to have what many are arguing food service. I'll continue there for a second. Food service, they think, is going to lose between 20 and 30% of its normal consumption. Even we're talking post startup. I don't know what we want to call this. When we open up the economy again, we are going to have lost between 20 and 30% of that market share. With the combination of that with the canceled contracts mean we could be oversupplied with onions and potatoes by 40%. There's not a home for 40% of our crop going into 2020. So we'll harvest in September and October, and we'll market those onions from September through May of next year. So this problem is still going to exist and perpetuate all the way into 2021 with the types of crops that again are storage varieties. And that is the real damaging, significant, relatively long-term damage that we are going to be dealing with. It's not a problem that's right now that we're going to just be able to overcome. It's going to continue and continue for, I would argue, 18 months from now, even to get back to some sort of normal consumption, at least with onions.
What is it? So what are some of the countermeasures that you've had to do? I mean, obviously with the cutbacks of those kind of contracts, realizing that you can't just switch one from the other, right? From a fresh pack to a process is a part of that. What are some of those countermeasures that you're having to do? And this includes around, your labor, your everything that this is your full, your existence at the end of the day.
Right. So our countermeasures, first of all, we've minimized and been able to minimize based on some timing the amount of labor spend, the number of man hours that we're putting into the crops every day. And we've taken some of our what might be higher labor crops and gone into lower labor crops that are mechanized. Corn is an example, although corn has probably a net loss at the end of the day, but it doesn't require the labor side. We've also, on our fresh pack side, have purchased and put into place more retail centric type of equipment. So we're doing more consumer packs, 2, 3, 5 pound bags, but that will absorb a certain portion of that. And then at the end of the day, we will be competing, all of us, for that same piece of the pie.
Yeah.
So even though we have the capability and we're quite diversified in our customer base, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. We're going to be a target because we already have our piece of pie, and everyone's going to be stabbing their forks in trying to get their piece of that pie too. Right. So unfortunately, when it comes to onions, And a lot of these commodities, there's not a lot that can be done. Speaking to potatoes, I mean, like I said, I know there's several thousand acres of potatoes in Washington. I don't know about Idaho at this point that have been taken out, because some feel like the loss is lower at this point, putting a different crop in. But I think it's pretty much, I don't want to say it's status quo, because we're all doing as much as we can. We've got the whole peel operation where we're trying to process a fresh product, one more step in vertical integration. But there's not a silver bullet here. It is a matter of trying to be as smart about dealing with the ramifications of this, and planning and preparing for a very, very difficult 14 to 18 months.
Wow. Yeah. No, I think we can all feel that. And I think everybody's kind of relating to that as it exists today. And I mean, again, it's hard to go into a store, as much as everybody can try and contribute. It's hard to see empty shelves out there once you just knew you had immediately as a part of it. So it's great to hear, exactly what you're doing and understanding kind of the steps and the processes, because I think those are the big, sometimes those are the big misses that we aren't seeing, in trying to understand that a little bit more fluidly in terms of how you're having to keep momentum and keep things moving positively. So a bit of a shift, Edward, for you, in looking at kind of this pandemic as a part of it, one of the things is in understanding where you are is, do you think, I mean, is it now a good time to really invest in agriculture as a part of this?
Well, sure. So it sort of does this crisis sort of breed opportunity as a distressed investor or what have you? Look, Shay took the question from the sort of on the ground, maybe short, I'll say that the 18 months and closer is sort of more of a short-term period. Whereas, us as farmland investors, well, we're very much taking a long-term approach, not trying to time this, have no strength in believing that, when will the tide turn here? We've obviously, seen the greatest contraction in global GDP ever. We've never seen a simultaneous supply shock, demand shock, oil price war, tariffs, trade war, global pandemic in history. So I think, what we've gone through recently has been unprecedented. And frankly, truth be told, obviously farmers for the last number of years, it hasn't been great anyway, even pre-COVID and pre-market sell-off. We've been sitting on, large inventories across many crops for many years, on the back of, pretty strong supply, good growing seasons, but also, relatively weak demand in the face of, let's say, tariffs. Obviously, that was a manufactured demand destruction, but then also sort of black swan events like, African swine fever in China, eating up, culling 40% of the Chinese and Southeastern Asian hog herd. What that does feeding through to our own exporters and on the feed side. We've had various emerging markets currencies which have obviously their currencies have collapsed, but it also in the face of pre-COVID a U.S. economy that was really doing quite well, interest rate differentials that were strong. So obviously that led to a stronger U.S. dollar, so that further weighed on U.S. exports. We've had an ethanol industry that was already running up against sort of refining mandates and ethanol blend wars, and now you've had a Saudi-Russian oil war, which has crushed oil prices in the face of sort of anemic global demand, which has translated to hurting the ethanol industry and ethanol margins, and then corn grind. So there's been a lot of developments over recent years that ag has been hurting from those, and obviously COVID has just added to that pain. I do expect to see maybe some capitulation here, where farmers who've been involved in this for a while think, okay, look, enough is enough. When are the locusts coming? This has been a hard time. But from my seat, I still go back to thinking, okay, how many of these phenomena are short-term, more transitory versus more sort of protracted going forward? Like, what will change? Like, Shay's alluding to, okay, it could be a tough 18 months, but going forward, maybe shops and restaurants and stuff, they will come back, and maybe things change. And outside of all the long-term macro data that everyone on this call probably knows, population growth and increased proteinization, etc. No need to go into that. I think there are a few areas that are still, maybe in the last year have really, and also more recently have become front and center. One is climate change. I mentioned that obviously we've had strong supply across the board in most crops for a while, but we also have had, some really phenomenally, terrible, climate disasters in the last year alone. We had, in the US, we had the wettest spring ever. Now it ended, and then farmers were able to get in the field and plant, a lot of their crop last year. But we've had Aussie bushfires, we've had the Amazon burning, we've had California wildfires. And I just think, playing the long game, with climate change and global warming, is there going to be an increased likelihood that maybe we're due for a weather event? I'm not going to, bet the farm on it, so to speak. But, all these weather events have, for the most part, happened, at opportune times, not happening during the growing season. That, maybe we have one of those in the northern or southern hemisphere growing season at some point, and that sort of wipes out inventories, and it's a general reset. I mean, ag is cyclical, and you go through these sort of peaks, and like we saw it in 2012, and you can go from decent, we had relatively okay crop balances, and then you can have farmers making a zero. So I think that, supply side, there's always that inherent put for ag and farmland investing, that I think that, in any given year you can, the slate can be wiped clean, so to speak. Second point really is more focused, I think, on the COVID side, and that's really been the global fiscal and monetary response to this crisis. We have never seen such synchronized, coordinated responses by governments and central banks around the world. And I saw a stat this morning saying that, we maybe fiscal and monetary stimulus of $20 trillion in the last 2.5 months alone. That's 20% of last year's GDP. $20 trillion, $9.5 trillion of that coming really from the US in terms of QE and on the government side as well. That really, in this space, I start to think that, with this massive increase in money supply, and destroying the value of money per se, and also the fact that the US is becoming more indebted, and we're going to have debt to GDP ratios over 100%. At what point does the confidence in the US dollar sort of start to recede? When we start to think, okay, we've got huge supply of money, we still have anemic demand. Are we going to start to see some sort of inflation, hyperinflation? Does the dollar roll over? And I think a lot of these areas, particularly on the inflation side, are obviously supportive for food. And then within my space, it's obviously farmland, as a store of value. It's done well in times of, in times of inflation, and also, obviously we've seen the US dollar as a safe haven and gold as a safe haven, but maybe people start to realize that, land, cash flowing, real asset is also a place that you want to park your money when you're just hitting the printing presses. Third point, which I think is also really important, and I think it really reflects what might be a behavioral change in the world, concerns food security. And obviously, look, within the US, we're very fortunate to be part of the breadbasket of the world, that we have the best infrastructure, the best technology, the best farmers, the widest breadth of crops. We're a net exporter in a world where there are many countries that are losing water, that need to import food, etc. And I know that, obviously we've had our own domestic supply bottlenecks and issues that have impacted certainly the farm level and also the meat industry. But those will improve over time, particularly as the economy opens up. But what we have seen is during this crisis, we've started to see murmurings of the Arab Spring again. We've had 17 plus countries around the world, many big exporters, start to erect export curbs. We've had big importing countries really start to fret about their ability to secure supply. And I think that, when the dust settles here, there will be that time when maybe ag, particularly US ag, becomes more front and center, where governments, sovereigns, food companies start to say that they want to have, pay increased attention to having control, or direct access to the producer, to supply, to make sure that they are focused on this strategic asset, that they don't have to go through, that issue again if there is another pandemic, if there is a second wave, if climate change is leading to, an increased likelihood that we do have more of these pandemics of different types going forward. So I think that, with that said, food security is going to become a increasingly important theme. Maybe you start to see sovereigns and food companies increase their stockpiling, which can be generally supportive as well. Now, of course, look, right now, a lot of negative stuff for the US farmer. But as I mentioned earlier, I think, the crises, they often lead to opportunities. I am, quite bullish in terms of, opportunities to secure additional farmland or structure deals with farmers if they aren't capitalized but they want to remain on the farm, figuring out ways, understanding that, we have the world, I think, in the last few months has certainly changed. And, obviously the QE side, food security side, I think these are climate change. These are themes that are new themes that will continue for a while.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for that. Appreciate it very much. So, gentlemen, both, thank you so much for, these are just kind of the questions that I wanted to review with you guys and share with our viewers as well. I know we have a bit of Q&A as a part of this, and I believe, Kate has got some information on that, so I will.
I do, and we've had some great questions coming in. Keep them coming, everyone. This will make the conversation even more rich, and this has been fantastic so far. Thank you, gentlemen, for all of your contributions. I think that it's a really interesting hearing both perspectives from the investment side and from the grower side. I think that this conversation is so beneficial to everyone on the line, and I'm getting comments to that effect as well. So kudos and thanks so much for doing this and all the time you spent putting it together. I think it's been great so far, so let's keep it going. Laurette says Shay has been very clear about the challenges for the next 18 months, and I agree. That was a great section. I thought, the straight talk on what the outlook actually is and what we're dealing with. She's asking if perhaps you could comment on the new federal program that they're trying to roll out and relationships to food pantries for offtake, and if you've seen any of that activity, or if maybe some of your fellow farmer friends have. If you could speak to that, that would be great.
Yeah, so if I put on my marketing hat here for a moment and talk about onion sales and produce sales in general, the Farmers to Family Food Box program, which is what she's likely referring to, is being implemented. It started last week. In a lot of ways, it has been to say failure is a little bit of an exaggeration, but not too much. It's been very hard to get implemented. The dollars were allocated in ways that really don't make sense and that were very, very frustrating for farmers and distributors. In general, though, from a demand side, we have seen the demand increase for that product. The purchases are taking place. There has been a small impact on the value of many of the commodities that are out there. But when I say a small impact, I mean maybe a 5% increase in those prices. The oversupply that we're talking about here is not going to be fixed by any type of government program. I wish it could be, but I mean, what we're talking about, just as an example in our operation, just to put it in perspective, we're completely vertically integrated. We're doing all the farming, all of the packing, and all of the sales. In fact, we do sales for multiple different farmers as well. So we're quite active on the sales side. But when we get done, the potential with this oversupply, so the rule of thumb is a 7% increase in price for every 1% in decrease in supply, and the opposite is true. So for every 1% increase or oversupply that we have, we're talking about a loss of 7% on the price. If that's true and we're 40% oversupplied, we're talking about values of many of these commodities that are absolutely below cost of production, completely below. I mean, we're talking about losses to, let's look gross sales numbers. We're thinking it's potentially that's possible for us to see a 70% reduction in our gross sales for 2020 over 2019. 70%. I mean, that's how significant this could get, because if we get into a bloodbath where it's only about covering the packers' cost, so there's really kind of three parts. There's a marketer that has to recover their costs. They're not going to sell a commodity without making their commission. The packing operator that gets the raw commodity and puts it into a package to sell is probably not going to do much more than break even, and they possibly could take a loss. So if this person, the marketer, takes their profit, because there's no reason for me to sell as a marketer if I'm not going to make something. The packer, let's say they do it for absolute break even or a slight loss, that means we get into a complete absolute price war. It's a lot like what we've seen with the oil industry, where we're seeing prices on commodities that have never been seen before. That's the real scary side. I hope that doesn't happen, but I can see where we could see, let's use an onion, $7 is our break even per 50-pound unit. I would not be surprised, and I hope that I am completely wrong. I wouldn't be surprised to see $2 in the market for most of the 2020 season when we start this fall. You can imagine what that does to to the economics and the value of the farm when you're talking about that kind of loss.
Definitely. Thank you for that. We have Sajer joining us today from Dubai, and this sort of speaks to, I think, Edward, what you were commenting on in terms of, taking maybe this oversupply and finding an export market. Is that, I guess, I mean, everyone is in the same position right now. So I guess the question is, for Shay, are there markets that maybe have not been explored for some of the produce coming out of the U.S.? I guess that's a question from someone stationed in the Middle East who's suggesting that could be a potential export market.
So I've been there and I've considered that. So the one thing that's different is some of these commodities, we can reduce plantings. And what is the economic fallout? What is the damage in some of these second and third world countries as far as their production? Do they have enough cash on hand? Can they get finance to plant their crops? If those farmers in those regions, those other countries, start to have a cash crunch or a supply, a planting, a growing challenge, certainly the pendulum could swing. But I've considered that. So maybe the recovery, instead of being 14, 18 months, is 8 to 10 months. But that is something that could make a difference. What is the economic or the damage to farmers in these other countries that we are not going to see until it's actually happening? Onions are one of the most exported vegetables in the world. In fact, the number one most world wide traded fresh vegetable that there is. So we usually see the ramifications of this when it happens, but this isn't the time. We wouldn't know until November or December what this is going to be. One of those things, though, to consider, China is a significant producer of onions and a significant exporter of onions worldwide. Lots of people uncomfortable with China as their supplier. And there are some people that are arguing, okay, there's your opening. Maybe there will be some significant openings for export from the Northwest of the United States to other markets that you're not seeing. That's the silver lining side, or the optimistic side of the argument.
Thank you. Let's switch gears just a little bit and talk about water, which is sort of one of the places where we started. So Trevor, there's a question from Muhammad wondering if Valley is working with other types of irrigation systems other than center, and if not, why not? I mean, center pivot, if not, why not? Can you talk a little bit about the technology that Valley has been favoring and why that is?
Well, part of this, I think, goes back to Kate, is Valley's got a long history in terms of being in irrigation as a part of that, and has looked at drip in different areas. And not to say that it's just, as Shay is a testament to that, right? He uses drip very accurately. He uses mechanized irrigation, be it over watering systems, as a part of that as well. For us, really, where we look at this from a mechanized piece is also beyond automation, is being able to start doing a bit more with that type of technology and integration into basically into the manufacturing of the steel. And we want to be able to start integrating a lot of that, more of that technology around that piece. The other thing that we have to question around that also does come down to the labor costs when we start looking at that, right? The more automation is a part of it. I mean, we're in that particular situation as it exists today. I think where we're staying as a part of our core is really to drive directionally where we are. Not to say, from an irrigation perspective, I say we're pretty well set in this direction. Now to add into that other applications that we use for irrigation that can then help facilitate other irrigation types, right? Whether that be through pumping stations, through the management of flow meter monitoring, tank monitoring. Those are a lot of those other pieces that we're also, as a part of our organization, that we're very diversified within our portfolio of doing center pivots or doing the linears that go directly across the field, right, is in one pass. So I think that's where, what we see as being the most optimal area. That's where we've seen, our existence just continue to thrive and grow. But being able, again, to branch off into different technologies that adapt and come along with that. Those are some of the areas where we do look at different ways to contribute into, irrigation and water as a whole. So ultimately, we're looking for better efficiency to reduce the water costs that are out there in the, in the footprint, and how can we continue to optimize to keep guys like Shea out there with their generations of growers. And that's really what we're doing for, when we think for the producer, these are kind of the waves or the sprints that we're thinking in as it exists today.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And just to continue down that thread, Shea, we have an attendee who's asking, do you consider U.S. water expenditure being a large part of your OPEX? Or what do you consider as the largest CapEx for an agriculture company regarding irrigation, is the way that is phrased.
Yeah, so we'll certainly, that's fairly straightforward. Our CapEx for equipment, whether it's a center pivot or drip irrigation, is certainly much higher than the cost of the water itself where we're at. In our valley, we're talking about between $50 and $70 per acre for 4-acre feet of water. Mm-hmm. So the water is still relatively inexpensive. There's places where it's much more expensive. Now, there's other parts of the country. Right now, I'm in the Central Valley of California, where it's much cheaper. $8 or $12 an acre. We have farm ground with the same thing that's $3 or $4 an acre, per 4-acre feet, which is our normal allotment. So it's kind of all over the board, but the equipment and the consumable side of that equipment, whether it's drip irrigation or overhead, is certainly much higher than the water itself.
Thank you. Edward, just wanted to let you know, by the way, the locusts are coming. Three states are expecting their 17-year cicadas, so be ready for that. 2020 is the best. Here's a question for you. I know you said you were fairly dedicated to U.S. farmland, but do you see the current state of affairs and sort of the next year of uncertainty? Do you see that ag funds might start looking at more countries that they would have considered a high risk before, but maybe they can find some great value, countries in South America or other areas? Would you consider stepping outside of the U.S. in a time of volatility?
So I'll speak to us first. We are U.S. centric. Part of our thesis was really making sure that first of all, you do what you know, and we've been doing this for a while, and we have no experience, in other countries. If I ever was to leave, I'd probably, focus on, on those rule of law Anglo-Saxon countries where, someone can't roll their tank over and take your land. But look, no expectations and no belief that we're going to be changing our mandate going forward. I think there's plenty of opportunity within the US. Certainly I think that maybe other funds do emerge that want to focus on, some of these, there are a lot of farmers out there who, with these very weak currencies, the Brazilian real, record weak, the Vietnamese dong. I mean, obviously that's a smaller country for vis-a-vis, global ag. Maybe they're just focused on rice, but a lot of the South American countries where with record weak currencies, assuming that you have the capital and the ability to take care of your inputs. I mean, farmers are doing very well in terms of they're bringing on fresh acres, they're capitalizing on record weakness. Their margins are very high in these instances. Now, obviously, a lot of these emerging markets have their own issues, their own indebtedness, their own politics and issues there. So for each their own. I imagine it's a bit of a balance there, but we're certainly not going to be leaving the US anytime soon.
Okay. And while I'm with you, let's stick with you for one more from a macro sort of perspective. Shay touched on a little bit about, there may be some sensitivity to, trusting China for certain vegetables. We have our own shaky issues with the trade deal as it was arranged. We're not sure what that's going to look like moving forward with all of the tension. So can you talk a little bit about future perspective for the ag economy as it relates to China specifically? I know that that's a big question, but I thought you might want to take a macro swing at it.
Yeah, I mean, everything macro is big, right? So look, I think China, obviously massive buyer. I mean, they hoover up 40% of our soybeans, and all else equal, trade war has been very much of a net negative for the US farmer, and other countries have been able to capitalize on this and maybe grow market share. And once you lose market share or you lose trust with the company, it's very hard to get back. So look, it doesn't help that we have poor relations with China, and I think there are more negatives to it than there are positives. Now, certainly in terms of, so I'll just leave it there. I think that I could go down a rabbit hole on talking about China, but would I rather that they were in our camp and buying? Sure, that would be much better.
Okay, thank you. Shay, have you seen COVID-related effects on labor supply, or do you know people in your circle who have?
Yes, absolutely. There have been, it depended on the growing, or not the growing, but the contracting region that you utilized for bringing H-2A workers in, as an example. We use H-2A workers, which is an agricultural visa. These folks can come from, a multitude of different countries, from South Africa, Central America, Mexico, even Canada. We were fortunate in that our workers came from Mexico, and we were able to, the borders weren't shut down. Those that were sourcing from Central America, Guatemala in particular, a lot of those guys, that border got shut down and they were not able to bring workers at all, or their numbers were reduced significantly. Some policies have been put in place domestically that allow contracts for H-2A workers that have lapsed or that have come to their expiration date, and they've been able to, instead of being forced to go back, which is normally the case. You normally be here 9 to 10 months total on an agricultural visa. Those folks that are already here, already approved, have been allowed to move from one contract, maybe from Florida, and come up to Washington. And that has opened up and taken some of the pressure off. Labor right now, I mean, in agriculture in general, labor is a problem. But we have seen the least, or we've had the easiest time hiring for most of our positions in the last 2 months that we've seen in the last 10 years, without a doubt. The people are there, and they are willing and able to work in a lot of situations. So labor, I don't see, at this point in time, I don't see it as a significant risk.
Okay, thank you. On the ag tech front, and I'm an ag tech enthusiast myself, and I think that for the last decade, I've been hearing people talk about, there's a lot of data out there, there's a lot of way to capture it, but we're still missing the mark on finding, sort of a Google for it, one tool that can kind of aggregate and help actually put it to very good use for the farmer. Trevor, I'm going to send this one to you first, and then maybe we can kick it over to Shay. But wanted you to address a little bit about data overload and where is Valley investing internally to develop maybe some new ag tech strategies that you think are going to be very useful on farm.
Sure. So I appreciate that. I think the one, and an ag tech enthusiast myself for the last 20 some years as well. So I appreciate that, Kate. I think the biggest thing for me is, one, I don't know that there will ever be one single thing, right? For the years that I've been in this, at least from my experiences on a farm, and Shay may have the same and or different thoughts around this, but also from working at a dealership, working at an OEM, right? So sitting on all three sides of the table of precision ag technology itself as this umbrella, when I start looking at this in data and data overload, and what you really have from that is sometimes it's only about as good as the data that can actually be entered and put in, right? But then when you start looking at these different systems, they become disparate, meaning I've got so much to go on over here, so much to go on over here. And so they're in the siloed offerings as a part of it. I think the bigger push by us, and not just by us, but many others as well, but specifically focusing us, we're trying to create a platform where it's just a simple single sign-on access that allows a grower to go and grab the information that is most desirable to them and most important to them in terms of value in data, right? Because the data overload to me means, right, that there are so many pieces. That's great. It was like the initial stages of farming when we started printing these maps on the software, and that was awesome. But what did I be doing with this pretty colored map? I don't know. I'm going to have to go get an agronomy degree or just go take it to my agronomist. And how much time is that actually consuming of my day for all these other decisions that I have to make? That's one of those, the push and pull situations with the amount of data overload that I actually see. The other types of data is the other piece. And to me, it's, what we've seen grow in most of those cases is, that you've seen, things, technologies such as GPS and aerial imagery and flyover and drone technology and data from soil moisture sensors. So you have all of this stuff, as I've used this term before, it's kind of spaghetti. And right now, what I want is lasagna. Right? It's easy, it's stackable, it's easy to understand. I can input the information that I want, very simple, and I can insert what's most important to me that year, maybe based off of events, based off of a lot of that information. And that's what we look to try and consolidate. So a lot of where we're working towards that is on pivot sensor technology, right? So I don't have to wait for planer flybys. I could literally just have my pivot scan the field, give the information, tell me the crop health, right? Tell me the uptime that I have in productivity. Those are the things that we're looking at as we continue to evolve in that, and trying to consolidate a lot of that information so that it becomes more predictive and proactive versus reactive. Because if I've got a cold, I'm already going to go to the doctor. And right now, growers are trying to figure out, as a third generation potato farmer, once late blight was there, it was there. I'd like to see better early indicators to know how to be more preventative in that state. And so that's how we were trying to simplify that equation, really to offer that in one uniform offering in a platform like we're doing that with Valley 365, where we have a lot of that technology today, but it's now been consolidated into one single sign-on where the grower can go get their irrigation data, but then also make it open. And that's the biggest thing I think is also very important to understand. Make it an open source of communication to be able to really retrieve that information, because you're not always going to be picked, and that's the way it is, right? But having the ability to have an ease of use, a simple way to retrieve that information, that's what's really sticks, I think, with the growers in mind.
And then Shay, I'm going to kick that question over to you with a bit of a different spin on it. And Shreyash has asked this question. I actually think it's a really important one, because as much development as we've seen of cool new ag tech over the last 10 years or 12 years, I would assume when you're talking about a 70% reduction in sales, you're going to be a lot more cautious in adopting a new technology or in purchasing something new for the farm. So can you talk a little bit about how you view the value of tech right now, and maybe what someone would need to present to you to make that investment in such a scary time.
Yeah, certainly. The capital expenditures that we're making, we're going to be thinking about very carefully, and looking at what the ramifications might be. If you're trying to sell an ag tech product, though, farmers are really, really open to new technology when you can show clearly what the ROI is. And what you're looking for is a maximum ROI of 5 years, and you're looking for something better in a 2 or 3 year range. If you can come to me and say, look, this is going to pay and it'll pay for itself in 3 years time, I think even in today's economy, there's a lot of people that would be willing to jump on that type of technology. It's just a lot of times when that new technology is coming out, it's unproven. So you have a difficult time saying, this is your ROI. Like, it's like the ROI of maybe social media marketing or just marketing in general, right? How many of us have gotten in that room and you're trying to justify that expenditure, because it's really not quantitative. You can't look at what the return is. So if you have something though that's solid, consistent, and provable, I don't think you're in a dangerous spot.
And here's just one for frivolous fun. What's the coolest tech? You don't have to name names, but what's the coolest new tech that someone's brought to you in the last couple of years? Whether you used it or not.
Yeah, so I'd have to go with one that we've used. I mean, there's some really cool ones. There's some really cool weeding robots out there. There's a lot of autonomous stuff for in the field that are cool to see. There's one in the Central Valley here. I'm trying to think of it. It's a spraying autonomous sprayer that's going through all the orchards, which is really cool. I wish I could give credit to those guys and the name on that machine, but Gus. It's called Gus. Very, very cool, innovative, straightforward, simple tech that pays like no other, like it quickly. But the one that we have utilized is on the sorting side of our operation. Artificial intelligence and computer vision learning, or computer learning, and the aspect that we're able to take an onion now, scan it internally, see what's going on internally with the spectrometer, look and see what's bad on the inside. Look at the external defects, and then with near infrared, even some of the interlayers. I mean, that's pretty amazing. We've been able to reduce the number of sorters that we have by 40% using that technology and put out a way better pack. And it's one of those rare cases where you see cool tech and you're actually able to implement it.
I'd say one more on that, Kate, for Shay's operation is the determining of sizing as well on the asparagus and putting them into the containers. I don't think I can get tired of watching that. There's something very calming about it, I have to say. And it's also one of those things, being a techie myself, is I've never seen that, right? And it's just like, and you sit there and go on the shelf, how do they get that in that band with that particular exact size, right? It's those simple technologies, but there's complexity around that, right? There's a lot in machine vision and in machine learning and computer vision and all the intelligence around that piece is a part of it. So it does take, it's a phrase that I use often. It's called simple is hard to do. And that's really what tech is. It's hard to do in this day and age as a part of it, but you have to simplify it, to Shay's point, right, to really show that kind of an ROI.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much. I love all your adages, Trevor. I wrote down a few that I'm going to take home with me. Right. Well, I'm always home. We're all always home, aren't we?
Right.
But right now it's spaghetti and I want lasagna. I think that one I'm just going to flat out steal. I hope you don't mind. I would love, this has been incredible and we're coming up on time, but I would like each of you maybe to just give one, final thought and make it not a depressing one.
I'll let our guest
you're talking to me.
Edward, we'll start with you. Maybe something a bit hopeful for our financial future.
Wow. Okay. I think some sort of adage, like, I don't know, in times of chaos, comes opportunity. We'll go with something like that. That it's been a rough ride, but this is America. You can go. Better times ahead.
Okay. Rah, rah, sis, boom, bah. I like it. Shay, how about you? Where can we find some glimmers of hope on the field?
Yeah, I mean, ag is going to succeed. It has to. We still have to eat, and agriculture is a wonderful place to be when things are challenging. This is a bit more challenging than I think any of us want to deal with, but it is a great place to be. And when you're in agriculture, you're working with many people that are very passionate about what they do. Their history oftentimes goes back generations. If you're looking for an industry that is not going to give up easily, a people or group of people that will and can quickly adapt and react and be proactive, that's largely agriculture. So I mean, the food production, the future is bright. It's just a matter of how many dark nights and whatever else we have to pass through. I mean, from Edward's perspective, I can see that, I mean, the place to invest, it really is agriculture. It makes sense. I mean, I guess it's good for me to say that because I'm in it, but certainly we're fortunate to be in the industry that we're in a lot of ways.
I completely agree. It's the best place to be, and I think that saying that benefits all of us. So I know it to be true. So Trevor, with that, I want to let you give a final thought and just say thank you for your partnership and for putting this together.
Absolutely. No, appreciate it. And thank you for the valuable time. Thank you, Shay and Edward, for doing this. And like you said, you're in it, we're in it, we're all in it, right? So that's why if you eat, you're in farming. That's the whole purpose of what's really kind of helped drive this piece. I think, and as an ex-farmer myself, but still loving going out and kicking the dirt and being with our growers, being with the people who support them, our dealers, and the people around us, and what we really strive to do. This is more than just product to us, right? These are relationships that we've built. So, I say, there's light at the end of the tunnel. I don't think this is just it. And the reason why is because the farmer's there. The farmer continues to work, continues to grow crops, continues to take care of the land, and make sure that, no matter what the case, cause, catastrophic event, they continue to care. And that's, to the farmer and all of us, thank you. That's exactly what this is for us, right? Regardless of what segment we serve, we really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. And thank you to all of our listeners. We hope to see you soon at an upcoming webinar. Go visit valley.com. If that's wrong, I apologize. Trevor, correct me on the website. Is that right?
You're good. Yeah, Valley.
Okay, very good. Go to valley.com. And once you've had a good time over there, come on over to globalaginvesting.com. And we'll see you soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks,
Thank
guys.
See you.